So there's a lot of new information coming out about 3iAtlas. It's very exciting. I thought it was time for me to do an update. I want to talk about some of the observations that the astronomers and astrophysicists have made. And then I also want to talk about some new information that I got by channeling. For those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Jennifer Lisa Vest. I am a medical intuitive, a psychic medium. I have a background also in astrophysics. I used to be a philosophy professor. I have a very diverse background, so I'm both an intellectual and a spiritual person. And I like to look at things from both perspectives. I like to look at intuitive information and also look at empirical information. And I think that those are both forms of knowledge that are equally valid. And so I think that in the future, the psychics and the scientists are going to work together. And I myself identify as both a psychic and a scientist. Now, my background in astrophysics is just a bachelor's degree. And then I did work for a couple of years at the Stanford Linear Accelerator. And then I went on to other things. So I've been following what a lot of the astronomers have been saying. And if you've seen my earlier videos, you know that I've been sharing the different updates that have been coming out from different astronomers, astrophysicists, and other creators on here who are following the, kind of reports of what's coming out. So today's November 11th, and we've had a lot of new information coming out over the last 3 days. November 8th, there was a new image released of 3iAtlas. Let's see, what came first? There was another interest. Before I talk about the new image, there were 2 new images that came out about 3iAtlas in the last couple of days. But there was also the discovery of a new object that they're calling a comet that just suddenly showed up. And it showed up in between 3iAtlas and the Earth. And so that was a new finding. And they're calling it I think they're calling it 4 Borisov 2025 something. I started calling it Wingman because it really appeared to be the wingman of 3iAtlas. And so that was a new finding. And then there was a new picture that came out from, I think, British astronomers. And this new picture of 3iAtlas shows what they're calling jets, multiple jets. And let's see. Okay, here it is. So this is the picture that was released recently of 3iAtlas. And what's interesting about it is it shows all these, like a jet behind it and a jet in front of it. So they call it like a tail and an anti-tail, but it's basically jets. And the jets are really huge. So in terms of how long they are. And so this picture came out recently. And here's the other image. And I actually showed them out of order. This image came out first, I think on the 8th, and then the next image came out on November 9th. And so in this first image, although it's hard to see, there are some jets. And then the next image, the other image that I showed you, the jets are just much more dramatic. So this image came out first, the other image came out like a day later. So you can see in this second image that, it's much more spread out. And it's spread out both in front and behind. So the sun is like the lower left side of the image. And so the sunward jet, and then there's also a jet coming from behind the object. And so recently, Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist, has done an analysis of that, and some other people have too. And they've concluded that there are 16 different jets around 3iAtlas now. So it now has something, jets of something, dust, gas, something that's moving out from around the nucleus in 16 different directions. And so this has led to speculations about, does this mean that 3iAtlas exploded and it's now, fragments, and that it got overheated by the sun and now it exploded into a bunch of little pieces and is soon to be no more. That's one possibility. Of course, Avi Loeb is always going to talk about other possibilities. That's what we love about him. And so he said, or is this a manufactured, object? And are these objects that have separated from it, other objects that have separated from it? I don't know if he actually comes out and says that, but he always raises the question. He always says, we don't know, right? There are different hypotheses about what this could be. We really can't say for sure that it's only one thing. And that's what's great about him, is that he's an astrophysicist. He's got a lot of, status and credentials behind his name. And he is, the only astrophysicist right now who's coming out publicly and being interviewed on multiple TV shows and podcasts. And he's the only one who's raising these questions and saying, could this be alien technology? We think it's a comet, but, there's a lot of anomalies. They don't really add up to a comet. Let's consider some other hypotheses, like maybe this is an artificial object. Maybe this is a technologically produced object. Maybe it's not a natural object. And so it's a very interesting question, right? And so with each anomaly that comes out, right, there's like 10, I think there's more than 10 now. So the last time I did an update, there were 10. And I think there's now 11 anomalies. The newest one, well, is this last one an anomaly? I guess not. Yeah, the newest anomaly is the mass. So Avi Loeb did a calculation of this last picture. So looking at this last picture with all of these jets, and then trying to calculate the mass. And what he found was the math isn't mathing again. So they had already estimated the mass of 3iAtlas based on previous observations, before it went behind the sun. And also that last image I showed you, the first image that was from the 8th, where they also measured the mass there. And then now this image where it has all these jets. And what Avi Loeb found was that conservation of mass does not appear to be happening. That the fragments, that if you measure the mass of the jets and you compare that to the mass that they measured when it was all one thing without a jet or with just a small jet, that it appears to have not conserved mass, that it appears to be like an order of magnitude bigger than it was before in terms of its mass, which, isn't possible according to the laws of physics. Mass is always conserved. Either it turns into energy or it's some other form of mass, but it doesn't disappear, right? And so he's now raising this as another anomaly, which is really fascinating. Okay, so I want to actually read some of this article from Avi Loeb. So this is from 3 days ago. Did 3iAtlas just break up near the sun? And this is in reference to this picture where it has this really long jet. Well, jets, right? Okay, I think I had the wrong one. He's got so many articles. So I want to go back to, is this the right one? Yeah, this is the right one. And this one is called, yeah. So this one is from 3 days ago. He has a lot of articles. So actually I want to share this one first. So he talks about the jets first, and then his next article, he's like, did it just explode? Because that's now a hypothesis. Did it explode? Okay. All right, so here we have a complex jet structure emanates from 3iAtlas after perihelion. Perihelion is that point when it goes behind the sun, and then gravitationally is supposed to, be affected by that in its trajectory, right? So we have, this most recent image. Is this the most recent image? These are from November 8th, right? So you can see that it has these jets, moving out from it, right? And then, so he says, this morning on November 8th, the 3iAtlas showed this complex jet structure, and when it was observed by Geiger and Ryman, right, and Prosperi, right? So he talks about how they calculated, they processed it by taking several images. And he says, given that a large number of jets appear in many directions, the reported non-gravitational acceleration of 3iAtlas that he discussed before requires much more than 10 to 20% of its initial mass to have been ejected near perihelion. Only a fraction of that mass carries an excess momentum in a preferred direction. That means that the cloud of debris around 3iAtlas must represent a substantial fraction of its initial mass for a natural comet. However, technological thrusters could give the object a boost with much less mass jetted out at a higher speed. So this is where he's bringing in this possibility, right, that maybe there are thrusters, maybe this is an artificial object, because how do we explain this huge amount of jets, right? So, the physics requires that you explain the jets in terms of the movement of mass and momentum, right? It has to be explainable using the math, using the laws of physics. And what he found was that, it's a little bit hard to explain if you're thinking of it as a comet. First of all, one of the things he says is, why are the jets going in all directions? Jet in one direction would give it momentum, right? If you wanted to explain non-gravitational acceleration, you would have a jet in one direction. But they didn't really see that. Like, they didn't see a jet in one direction that kind of matched the change in acceleration. So that was the first, kind of bizarre thing. Okay, so in an article he wrote after that one, he starts to talk about how the math isn't mathing. So he says, Houston, we have a problem with the natural comet hypothesis. The required surface area of 3iAtlas to provide the inferred mass loss from the latest post-perihelion image is at least 16 times larger than the upper limit derived here from its Hubble image on July 21st. So, right, they calculated the mass on July 21st by that image, and now they're looking at this image, this most recent image. Let's go back up. And when they calculate the mass from this image, it's not matching, right? So when they first, and then he also refers to, okay, on August 6th, when they had web data, 3iAtlas had lost 150 kilograms per second. The mass loss at perihelion derived above is 4 orders of magnitude larger. So the most recent images that they have are suggesting this huge 4 orders of magnitude, change in calculation of how much mass is being lost. And he says this is a dramatic increase requiring a power law dependence of mass loss on distance from the sun with a power law index of minus 10.5. I don't know what all that means. I know it has to do with the conservation of energy. And when you do the math, you should be able to, it should be consistent, right? The momentum, the mass, everything should be consistent. And so they're also looking at, well, it brightened in a certain amount from that earlier image. And so that brightening also tells them something about the momentum and the mass. So basically it's not all adding up, right? So his question then is, was the dramatic mass loss and brightening of 3iAtlas at perihelion evidence that it disintegrated? So this is the newest hypothesis. Did it break up into a bunch of fragments? That would have increased the surface area. And since the surface to mass ratio scales inversely with the characteristic radius of fragments, an increase in surface area by a minimum factor of 16 requires that 3iAtlas broke into at least 16 equal pieces and likely more. So this is where he gets the 16 jets. This would mean that 3iAtlas exploded at perihelion and we are witnessing the resulting fireworks. In other words, the latest image implies that 3iAtlas was decimated by heating from the sun if it is a natural comet, right? And so he says we're going to have to wait and see, like observations over the next few days. Does it maintain its integrity? And if it does, then we're going to have to consider the possibility that it is something other than a comet. Okay. So this is where Avi Loeb's theory is at. This is kind of where we're at. And we haven't had any new images since, I think, November 9th, 2 days ago. And that most recent image is the one that has all of the jets of something, right? So it's really interesting, right? I mean, this object continues to be really interesting. And so now I want to start talking about what I got intuitively in my most recent channeling about 3iAtlas and what it tells me about what some of the answers to some of those questions might be. Oh, and I forgot another detail. So Avi Loeb estimated that it's losing 50 billion tons of mass per month, but the estimated mass of the whole comet was only 33 billion tons. So that's kind of curious, right? Okay, so I just did a really long channeling today, seeking information about 3iAtlas. And so in the past, in my previous videos, I've talked about how um, on October 11th, I connected with 3iAtlas directly and had a conversation. And then a few days later, I connected with my star family and had a conversation about 3iAtlas. Today, the conversation I had was primarily with the sun, which was interesting. And I wanted to ask questions about, what the scientists are seeing, and also just trying to get more understanding about what it is. And so I'm actually going to read a little bit from my notes from my channeling. So I was connecting with the sun, and the sun was explaining how the sun is a matrix. So first there was information about the sun, which was really interesting. So the sun is a matrix that creates the whole solar system. And they were saying how we, humans have a misunderstanding of what this means because we have these dualistic ways of thinking. So we're really uncomfortable with this idea that like thoughts are things or that energy creates reality. And we see it as either we're real or we're not real. And the only thing we think of as real is the physical. And that's why we have a hard time understanding how the sun could be the creator of our universe or our solar system. And we only have this kind of physical understanding of the sun, producing light, which then creates chlorophyll that helps plants to live, and then the plants allow the animals to live, and then we eat the animals, that there's like this biological chain of existence. And we only have that kind of biological understanding of the role of the sun. So we don't really have an energetic, spiritual understanding of the role of the sun. And that's part of the problem. So they were re-emphasizing to me again that 3iAtlas was having a communication with the sun. And that and I was interested in that because I've heard some other psychics say that 3iAtlas is sending ascension codes through the sun or behind, that there's something that they're doing with codes. And when I heard that from other psychics, I was like, that feels kind of true. And so when I asked about that, they said, well, it's kind of true, but it's not exactly right, because the way that people are talking about the sun is they're acting like the sun is like this inert object that 3iAtlas is using, to send energy through. And so they said that's an incorrect kind of description of the sun, because the sun, of course, is like a sentient being. It's a powerful being, and it's not an object. It's a creator being. And it has created all of the life in our solar system. And we have kind of a hard time understanding that. So they said that once we kind of adjust that understanding of what the sun is, then it is accurate that there is some work being done, some energetic work being done that includes 3iAtlas and also includes the sun, and that's going to benefit all of us on planet Earth. But they said it's really not just about planet Earth, because as I mentioned in my very first channeling with 3iAtlas, they're not here for us. We're not the focus. It's not about us, but we are going to benefit. And so this exchange of energy is actually going to benefit all of the beings in the solar system, all of the planets in the solar system, including planet Earth. Now, they did address this issue of mass by saying that, when 3iAtlas connected with the sun, it gained mass. And so it is actually bigger now, and it does have more energy. And so if they're confused about how the mass changed, that's how the mass changed. So the sun, they got a bunch of energy from the sun, and energy is mass. And now they have a larger mass because of what they got from the sun. I think the scientific assumption is that going near the sun is going to result in sublimation, or the melting of this icy rock that they think a comet is. And therefore, you're going to have a loss of mass from that process. But what I was being told is that there was an increase in mass, actually. And this increase in mass might explain why Avi Loeb is now measuring this huge orders of magnitude increase in mass, right? Okay, so now they also addressed the issue of the jets. And so what I was told was that 3iAtlas sent out all of these, what they called intelligence-seeking vehicles. So these 16 jets that supposedly were recorded are actually vehicles being sent out from the larger object. And then they showed me that it was like a rock in space. In our dimension, they appear like a rock in space. But that's because they exist in multiple dimensions and we're only seeing this kind of iceberg effect. And so the energy that it got from the sun helped it to grow its mass and then be able to send out these 16, 17, they actually said 17 um, intelligence seeking vehicles. They also call them energy seeking vehicles. And they said that, it's the same thing. Intelligence, energy, those are synonyms. Life, those are all the same thing. Energy, life, intelligence, those are all the same thing. And so they're going to different planets in our solar system, and they're going to be, they're surveying, but also they're going to be providing something of benefit to all the life forms in those different planets. Okay, so where was I? Now, because I like the psychic information and the channeling to kind of agree with scientific observations, I'd like there to be some kind of dialogue, right, between empirical observations and intuitive observations. I did ask for information related to what will the scientists see in the future. And I was told a couple of things. I was told that one thing they were going to see was they were going to see an intact nucleus. And so right now there's speculations about, did the whole thing blow up? Is it all gone? Is it just going to disappear? And they said, no, we are going to see, there is going to be picked up on these other telescopes, whatever, some intact nucleus of 3iAtlas. They also said there was going to be a brightening again at a certain point, and another observation where it would brighten, where they would have to explain that. And then I was also shown what looked kind of like a double star. And they said that it was going to have an appearance similar to a double star. And let's see, a double star is, let me see if I can get a picture. So here's an image I found of a double star. And I think there are different kinds of double stars. Sometimes it's just stars that are near each other. Sometimes it's stars that have orbits around each other. I think they're called a double binary. But they said that they're gonna pick up something like this. It's going to be 3iAtlas, but they're going to pick up something that looks kind of like this. Okay, so one of the things that they said to me too is that this is kind of the nature of 3iAtlas, is that it's going to keep providing data that's perplexing, and it has been providing perplexing data from the beginning. And so, the way it's behaving, it's producing all of these paradigm shifting anomalies, potentially paradigm shifting anomalies. Like every day or every week, there's new data and they can't really handle it. Like they're all in chaos, talking about the scientists, because what's happening with 3iAtlas is challenging what they think of as immutable laws. So like E equals MC squared, like the conservation of energy, and just certain astrodynamic predictions that they can make based on the laws of physics, it's not following those. And so 3iAtlas is challenging these laws, and it's challenging it in so many ways that they can't really keep up. And so this is kind of part of the explanation of why we're getting a lot of radio silence about this object. Avi Loeb is complaining. A lot of us are complaining about where the high-rise image is. They were supposed to have been taken October 3rd, around that week when it was supposed to be closest to Mars. And we had this high-rise camera that was supposed to be able to get pictures which were orders of magnitude better in quality than all the other pictures we've seen. And yet they still haven't released them. And so we're like, well, if the government shutdown is ending this week, does that mean they're finally going to release the images? I really hope so. But what I was told is that people are in such shock that the astrophysics community is like scurrying around trying to make sense of all these anomalies. And because these anomalies are changing just some basic understanding, kind of the standard model for, cometary physics or astrophysics or interstellar object physics, whatever you call it. It's being challenged. Really, it's physics that's being challenged. It's really just basically physics is being challenged. And so they're not sure what to do because their status, their reputation, their jobs are on the line. If you go out on a limb and say, hey, we have to reevaluate our existing model for the universe, or our, idea of what laws are laws, that's a very risky thing to do, because if you're wrong, you're going to be a laughing stock, and you're going to lose your reputation, your funding, whatever, your job. So people are afraid to do that. And, Avi Loeb is like the only astrophysicist right now, I think, maybe there's others, going out on a limb. One of the few going out on a limb and just raising the question of, could this be technological? Could this be alien? Could this not be a comet? Could this be something that's not a comet, something we've never seen before? Like, he's just raising these questions. Whereas the standard, mainstream story right now is, oh, this is just a comet and it's just acting really weird. So like Michio Kaku in a recent interview said, oh, it's just acting weird because it's really old and it's from some other star system, and we don't know anything about that star system. And so it just has lots of really weird properties, and like, don't trip doesn't mean it's an alien. Okay, so there have been all these observations, which are kind of paradigm shifting. So there's been the, and Avi Loeb has been, identifying them as anomalies. Then we have other people online like Dobsonian Power and Stephen Burns. There's, and then there's Brian Cox. There's a few different people online who are either astronomers or astrophysicists, or just, curious people who have been talking about all these anomalies. And so there was the observation where it suddenly got brighter and they couldn't explain it. There was an observation where it got bluer and they couldn't explain it. There was the observation like, today or yesterday, where all of a sudden it has 16, 17 jets. So each of these observations creates its own crisis in the scientific community. And then it also potentially creates a whole field of study. So what they were telling me is like hundreds of astrophysicists or astronomers can all be focused just on the issue of brightness, for example, just on that observation from that day when they suddenly was brighter. That could provide work and lots of papers, lots of published papers by hundreds of scholars. And then hundreds of scholars could be focused on this irregular mass change that Avi Loeb is talking about. Hundreds could be focused on the blue color, right? And so we're in this paradigm shift, but people are afraid to say that. And people are afraid of having their careers upended. And also they're afraid of losing their funding, because everybody's research is based on certain assumptions, these laws, right? This standard model. And so if you've, put in for funding for a grant to do an experiment or to do some theoretical work, and it's based on, for example, let's say E equals MC squared, and now that's in question. I'm not saying it is, I'm just, hypothetically, right? Say one of these laws that is undergirding your research is now in question. That then kind of invalidates your research, right? Because now you got to start over. You can't start with those starting premises of, well, we all know the E equals MC squared, therefore I'm going to do research on the following. We can't do that anymore. And so that's what they were saying, is that, a lot of stuff is potentially in upheaval. Now, this was intentional. So I was told that it was intentional that 3iAtlas sent a lot of data to the scientists. And that's because they're trying to help us with an intellectual revolution. And what was interesting about this was this led to this whole discussion that relates back to our political situation in the US and in the world in general. And so they were talking about how there are different types of revolutions. There are intellectual revolutions, there are spiritual revolutions, and there are political revolutions. And that if we look at where we're at right now, astrologically and energetically and astronomically, in terms of the influence of these different planetary bodies, these comets, these asteroids, whatever they are, these solar flares, that the different things that we're encountering right now in our cosmos are providing us with an energetic kind of doorway or opportunity for us to undergo a revolution, right? So some people are talking about like Pluto and Aquarius as an example. Other people are talking about 3iAtlas as an example of something that's kind of raising our consciousness. And so 3iAtlas, being this kind of anomalous interstellar object, which is upsetting the apple cart, right? Just challenging a lot of assumptions within the scientific community, has the potential to cause an intellectual revolution, right? A scientific revolution. So that's a type of intellectual revolution. And what my guides then told me is that, when we look at the trajectory of the United States right now, and this circus that we're dealing with, and people trying to figure out, what's the timeline of that. And there's a lot of us, psychics who are predicting the timeline. We're having a hard time finding out exact dates. It's always hard to find dates when you're precog, because timelines shift and the future is not set. But they were trying to explain it to me in terms of 3iAtlas a little bit, and they said, there are three different things going on right now. There is an intellectual revolution happening in the scientific community right now as a result of 3iAtlas and of the other comets that are kind of being observed right now. It's not just 3iAtlas, because there's a whole bunch of them, and they're not really behaving. There's just a lot of unusual behavior right now. And so that's creating like a scientific revolution. And then there's also a spiritual revolution going on right now in our country, and actually throughout the world in a lot of different countries. And people like myself, the dreaming women, we really have an important role in terms of helping to bring about the spiritual revolution. And in my case, I'm trying to bring about both spiritual and intellectual revolutions, because I'm an intellectual and a psychic. And so I talk about things from those perspectives. But as dreaming women, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people kind of spiritually evolve by just sharing channelings that we're getting, sharing predictions that we're getting, sharing information that we're getting, that then helps people to remember who they really are and who they are as a spiritual being and as a conscious being, and then helping them to kind of evolve consciously. We're just kind of like touchstones or way showers or triggers or wake-up calls. Like, there's different ways to think about what role we play as dreaming women. And so they were saying that, that's our role. And then, so that's happening. There's a spiritual revolution happening. There's a scientific or intellectual revolution that's happening, in part as a result of 3iAtlas. But there's also a political revolution that's brewing in the United States, at least. It's actually brewing in a number of countries. But for right now, I'm going to focus on the US, because that's where I am. But it's all related. It's a global thing. So in the United States right now, we have a political revolution brewing, but it's happening kind of on parallel tracks. And so like in the US, there's a certain population that is most likely to kind of take to the streets and engage in a physical acts of revolution, like storming the Capitol and, overthrowing the regime, right? There's a certain group of people that are interested in that, or most likely to engage in that type of activity. And that particular group of people are the people that previously were followers of the circus or supported the circus, believed in the circus, thought it was going to help them, and now are getting hurt by it. It also includes a large body of people they call the apathetics. So these are people who didn't put in tickets for the contest, who didn't involve themselves in anything, who've just been sitting on the sidelines thinking that, nothing would ever affect them and who cares. But they're now being impacted. And so the reason that it's not clear at this point whether or not we're going to have a spiritual revolution that leads to an intellectual revolution that leads to a political revolution, or if we're going to have a political revolution that leads eventually to an intellectual and spiritual revolution, right? It can go in different orders, and so it goes in. If you look at history, there are different examples of this. So we have these things happening on different tracks at the same time. And it's really going to, it depends a lot on what the circus does. And so the people are one factor, the circus is another factor. And it's our interreaction, our interrelatedness, our mutual kind of interaction that determines what timeline we're going to be on. So, for example, in the US recently, our circus or head clown tried to remove food tickets from 40 2 million people. And if he had been successful, we would have had 42 million hungry people, many of them small children and elders. And that would have revolutionized millions of people in this country and would have led to, the political revolution. Now, another group of people, there's several groups of people like this that they have almost kind of radicalized through their actions. And so right now the food tickets thing is kind of in flux. It's people did get fed and some people didn't. And, we'll see in the next few days what actually happens. But then we also have like the situation with the cold water cars where lots of people were being kidnapped off the streets and put in prisons and separated from their family. And if they had been successful, or if they are one day successful in meeting their goals, the regime's goals in terms of the numbers of people they were intending to incarcerate, to turn into laborers, involuntary laborers, if they had successfully reached that goal, that could have been a catalyst for political revolution, because it would have completely destroyed certain industries like agriculture, which would have led to food shortages, which would have led to the radicalizing of lots of people who were hungry. Hunger is a big radicalizer. And so there are different things that they've been trying to do. Also, the taking away of health benefits. Like if that happens, then you're going to have a lot of angry relatives who are watching their family members suffer and, lose their lives. And they're going to then become radicalized and join the political revolution. And so, depending on how successful the circus is in causing mass suffering, that's going to determine how quickly the people react in a physical way in a political revolution. So that's one possibility. But the other possibility is that the spiritual revolution that is currently ongoing as a result of lots of different, the 4am Club, all of these women stepping into their intuitive powers right after the big contest and having dreams and getting clarity about that. And then all of the dreaming women, which includes not just the 4am Club, but also all of the healers, intuitives, and psychics who have been practicing their whole life, and who are light workers who have stepped onto this path of, in this particular historical moment, being part of the movement of providing a spiritual explanation for the political situation, helping people navigate the awakening, helping people to see the big picture, helping people to stay hopeful, helping people to figure out what to do, right? And so we have that whole spiritual movement happening. And then we have intellectual revolution happening with the scientists. And so these are all happening parallel to each other. And we don't know yet which route we're going to take to evacuate the circus. But it's going to be through one of these routes or a combination of these routes that we're going to evacuate the circus and then build something much better. Now, this is not just going to influence the US, but since my population is primarily the US, I do tend to focus on that. But this is going to affect, of course, the rest of the world as well, especially those countries that are intimately connected to the US and will be impacted first. But it's also, energetically, a lot of countries are at these pivotal points right now, regardless of their relationship to the United States. We can see that in Europe, there are a lot of countries who are going through a lot of flux right now. And we're seeing in Africa that a lot of countries are kind of rising up and asserting their sovereignty and pushing off the post-colonial, neo-colonialist structures. We are seeing a lot of change throughout the world. And in some places, like Nepal, or there's certain countries, we're seeing it's pure political revolution, right? That's what happens first. But that's not what happens first. They had a consciousness raising first, right? The young people had a consciousness raising, and then they immediately went into political revolution. But we're seeing different movements around the world that have to do with these three types of revolution. Okay, and back to the other things that I was told about 3iAtlas. In terms of observations in the future, there's also going to be a continuing issue with the mass. So they said we're going to continue to see that the mass of 3iAtlas does not match what we would expect given the laws that we follow, the physical laws that we expect to be followed. The mass is going to continue to be a problem. And so they're not going to be able to maintain this story of this being a comet or an asteroid. They're going to try to maintain it for as long as they can, but eventually they're going to have to admit that this story doesn't quite add up. So yeah, I'm trying to remember if there's anything else that I forgot. They also did tell me some things about Avi Loeb, but I can't share them publicly. But if Avi Loeb wants me to share them with him, I will. So if you know him, you can tell him. I don't know him. Something about his role in all of this. I think the one thing I could share is that this is a part of his life mission to do this work. It's not an accident that he ended up being kind of a spokesperson for that particular position or kind of question of, could this be something other than what we are expecting, right? Could this be artificial? Could this be alien? Could this be, nanu. There's just a real kind of fear of aliens that we have as humans, a lot of humans, and the scientific community has a huge bias against extraterrestrial life, even though at the same time our government has come out in recent years saying that indeed the United States has had interactions with intelligent beings from other places and has retrieved spaceships and technology, and we've had hearings on this. And so it's kind of baffling to me that we have had government officials come out and say, hey, this is a real thing. And then we still have scientists saying, we're not willing to entertain any hypotheses that include artificial objects or extraterrestrial life. Like, what is that about? That has to change because it's anti-scientific. And that's what I've been saying from the beginning, is that it's a very anti-scientific position. The scientific method requires that you have a hypothesis, and then you collect data, and then you test that hypothesis. And if the data doesn't support the hypothesis, you have to consider other hypotheses. And so that's what Avi Loeb is saying. He's saying, the comet is one hypothesis. There's also the artificial object hypothesis. And since we have all these anomalies that could support both hypotheses, we should consider both, right? That's just good science, in my opinion. And so we've got to overcome these biases. And of course, we also have anti-scientific biases in the spiritual community. Sometimes we do have some people who they won't listen to anything the scientists say. They're like, well, intuitively it's this. But, we got to combine these knowledges, right? We got to combine the intuitive and the empirical. We got to bring those together. And what's happening right now, at least for me, in my role as a dreaming woman, as a crystal gazer, as a precog, as a psychic medium, my role right now is to bring all of it together, right? The science, the political, the spiritual, the intellectual, we got to bring it all together. It's all related. And that's my special role, I guess. We all have a role to play, and I guess that's mine. I say guess because as time goes on, I find out more and more about what my guides want me to do. And then I'm like, okay, I guess that's my role now. And that's what it's like when you lead a spirit-led life, when your life and your decisions and your actions and your words are determined by what your spirit guides or your higher self, tell you. And that's my life. But I'm not irrational, I'm not anti-empirical. I believe in looking for empirical evidence that supports my intuitive information. And I do know that eventually all of this data is going to line up. I know that science and psychic are not mutually exclusive fields. They don't exist in separate worlds. They're just different ways of accessing knowledge. And, one day we're going to understand that. One day, a lot of us are going to understand that. Right now, there's only some people who understand that or are willing to entertain that possibility. I am one of those people, and I hope that you are too. So I want to thank everyone for listening. Thank you for the likes, the subscriptions, the comments. I love the comments. The community in the comments is amazing. Thank you to those who've joined as members. I am going to do a member-only video soon. I just have to figure out how. I'm still working on that. And also thank you to those who've joined my Patreon. It's Metatron Academy. You can find it in my bio if you want to join that. I do behind the scenes videos every week or so in my Patreon to just tell you a little bit about what I'm thinking and how I'm getting my information and why I'm talking about what I'm talking about in my videos. So if you're interested in that, you could join my Patreon. I'd love to have you there. And what else? Yeah, thank you to those people who are sending me those little super chat donations or thank you donations. I'm not sure what they're called, but there's ways in which you can send little donations after you watch my video or while you're watching my video. And I've been receiving those and I really appreciate that. My guides have been really insistent over the last couple of months that I devote a lot of my time and energy to making these videos and to channeling information. And that means I don't have as much time to devote to, income producing activities. And so I am happy that there is some income coming from this because I told my guys, if you want me to do this all the time, you've got to make it sustainable so that I can keep paying the rent. But I am listening and I am doing this work and I am open to requests and suggestions. If there's something you want me to talk about that I haven't talked about, I will. I do read all my comments and I do take to heart what people say in the comments. And I don't always do the things people ask me to because it might not be in alignment with what my guides want me to be talking about or looking into. So there's that. But thank you, everybody.